My name is Daniel Farouk. I am an Imam, a man of deep faith, a servant of God. For over 4 decades, my life revolved around my mosque, my congregation, and my unwavering devotion to the teachings of the Quran. To my community, I was a guiding light, a man of wisdom, a counselor, a source of comfort for those seeking solace in the words of the Almighty. I moved to this country with my wife and children nearly 30 years ago. It was supposed to be a new beginning, a divine calling to spread the message of Islam in a land that did not yet know its full beauty. My family and I embraced the journey with open hearts, believing it was written in the grand design of God's will. We arrived with hope, our minds filled with dreams of building a life that honored our faith, yet embraced the promise of America. And for a long time, it felt like I had succeeded. From the moment the first morning prayer echoed through the halls of our modest mosque, I felt a sense of fulfillment. I dedicated every waking hour to prayer, study, and guiding those who sought my counsel. I was there for weddings, for births, for celebrations of life. And I was there for the grief-stricken, for those who had lost their way, for those who sought forgiveness. They came to me with their fears, their doubts, their sins, and I reminded them of God's mercy, of the strength found in unwavering belief. But beneath my carefully constructed devotion, there were nights, long sleepless nights, where something stirred within me. A whisper in the silence, a question lingering just beneath the surface of my thoughts. What if I have it all wrong? I pushed it away, forcing myself deeper into prayer. Doubt was a test, a challenge to my faith. That's what I told myself. And yet it lingered. My wife, Amina, sensed it before I ever spoke a word. "You seem distant," she said one evening, watching me from across the dinner table. The children had long since grown and moved away, leaving only the two of us in a home that once overflowed with laughter. Now, there was only silence. "Are you feeling unwell?" I forced a smile. "Just tired. It's been a long day at the mosque." She reached across the table, resting her hand over mine. "You always say that." "But it's more than that, isn't it?" I hesitated. What could I tell her? That after all these years, after dedicating my entire existence to my faith, I found myself lying awake at night, haunted by something I couldn't name? That I sometimes wondered if my prayers were falling into an empty void? No, I couldn't. Instead, I squeezed her hand and nodded. "I'll be fine." But I wasn't fine. I was a man who had spent his life preaching about faith, about trust, about surrendering to God's plan. And yet, somewhere deep inside me, a small voice refused to be silenced. And I had no idea that very soon, I would have no choice but to listen. It started with a dull ache in my stomach, small, sharp, but manageable. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just indigestion from the heavy meal Amina had made the night before. But as the days passed, the pain didn't subside. It grew. Slowly at first, then all at once, like a fire spreading beneath my skin. I ignored it. I had to. My work at the mosque was demanding, and I had no time for weakness. People depended on me, widows seeking comfort, men wrestling with their faith, young souls looking for guidance. I was their shepherd, and shepherds did not falter. Then one evening, As I was preparing to lead the final prayer of the day, a sharp, searing pain shot through my abdomen, stealing my breath. My vision blurred, and I gripped the wooden podium in front of me, steadying myself as a wave of nausea crashed over me. A young man in the front row, Malik, noticed. "Imam, are you all right?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I forced a reassuring nod. "I'm fine," I lied, swallowing back the bile rising in my throat. "Just a bit tired." But I wasn't fine. And I knew it. Amina did too. She had seen the way I clutched my stomach when I thought she wasn't looking, the nights I lay awake in bed, shifting uncomfortably, wincing as the pain spread. "You need to see a doctor," she insisted one morning, her voice firm as she set a cup of tea in front of me. "I don't need a doctor," I muttered, stirring the tea absently. "It's nothing serious." She exhaled sharply, frustration creeping into her voice. "Daniel, this isn't like you. You never complain, but I see it. You're in pain. You need to go." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that faith was enough, that this was merely another test, another hardship to endure with patience. But deep down, an unsettling thought gnawed at me. What if she was right? 2 weeks later, after relentless pushing from Amina, I sat in a sterile examination room, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. The doctor, a man younger than I expected, with tired eyes and a too-practiced smile, entered with a clipboard in hand. He didn't look at me right away. That was my first clue. "Mr. Farouk," he started, his voice measured, careful. The results came back. A cold sweat broke across my skin. "It's not what we were hoping for," he continued, flipping through the pages. "The scans show advanced stomach cancer. Stage 4. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air, dense and suffocating. Stage 4. Terminal. A death sentence. My pulse pounded in my ears as the walls of the room seemed to close in. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The doctor kept talking, explaining treatment options, chemotherapy, palliative care, experimental drugs, but his voice became distant, like I was underwater. This wasn't happening. Not to me. I had spent my entire life serving God. I had devoted every waking moment to prayer, to worship, to guiding others toward righteousness. Why was this happening to me? Amina's hand found mine, her fingers trembling. She was crying, but silently trying to be strong. The doctor hesitated. "I know this is a lot to process. I'll give you some time." The door clicked shut behind him, and suddenly it was just me and Amina in the too bright room, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This can't be right," I whispered, shaking my head. "They must have made a mistake." Amina squeezed my hand tighter, her tears slipping down her cheeks. "Daniel." I pulled my hand away, standing abruptly. "No. I won't accept this. I won't." My voice broke. A sob tore from my throat, raw and unfamiliar. I had spent years comforting others in their suffering, reminding them that God's plan was perfect, that every trial was a test of faith. But now, standing on the precipice of my own mortality, Those words felt empty. Where was God now? Why wasn't he answering me? I staggered to the small sink in the corner of the room, gripping the edges of the porcelain as I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked foreign, gaunt, aged, afraid. I turned the faucet on, letting the cold water run over my hands, hoping it would shock me back into reality. But reality had already settled in, digging its claws into my chest. I was going to die. I had spent my entire life preparing for the afterlife, praying, fasting, leading others in faith. But standing there, with a terminal diagnosis hanging over me, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't ready. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I ever would be. Top of form. Bottom of form. Chemotherapy was nothing like I had imagined. I had seen others go through it before, members of my congregation, people I had prayed with, held hands with, reassured that God was with them. I thought I understood their pain. I thought I had prepared myself. I was wrong. The nausea came first, a rolling, relentless sickness that never truly subsided. Food became an enemy, the very smell of it twisting my stomach into knots. My body weakened. My limbs felt hollow, like they no longer belonged to me. My skin became pale, almost translucent, as if life itself was slipping from me little by little. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain. It was the silence. The long nights where I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of my own mortality pressing down on me like a heavy stone. The moments when my prayers felt empty, echoing in a vast, unanswering void. The creeping fear that, despite everything I had believed, I was truly alone. I told myself this was just another test. That suffering was part of faith. That I was meant to endure, to show strength, to prove my devotion. And yet, there were nights when I couldn't lift my head from the pillow, when the pain was so overwhelming that I wanted to scream. One evening, after a particularly grueling chemotherapy session, I collapsed onto my recliner in the living room, my body trembling with exhaustion. Amina knelt beside me, her hand smoothing back my damp hair. "You need to rest," she murmured. "Let me get you some water." I shook my head weakly. I just need to breathe." She hesitated but nodded, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead before disappearing into the kitchen. I closed my eyes, willing the nausea to pass. Then, a strange tightness gripped my chest. At first, I thought it was just fatigue. A side effect of the treatment, another burden to endure. But within seconds, the pressure grew, spreading through my ribcage like an iron fist squeezing my lungs. I tried to inhale, but my breath came in short, shallow gasps. My heart pounded violently. Panic set in. I tried to call out for Amina, but no sound escaped my lips. Everything around me blurred. My vision darkened at the edges, tunneling inward. My limbs felt impossibly heavy, like they were sinking into the chair. Then, nothing. Just darkness. But I wasn't gone. I was still there, still aware. Only now, I wasn't in my body anymore. I was above it. I looked down and saw myself, my own frail, lifeless form slumped in the chair, my skin pale, my mouth slightly parted. I saw Amina rushing back into the room, the glass of water slipping from her hands, shattering against the floor. She screamed, I tried to reach for her, to tell her I was still here. But I had no voice, no hands, no body. I was weightless, untethered, floating like a silent observer in my own home. Then the paramedics arrived. I watched as they worked frantically, pressing their hands against my chest, shouting commands, their voices urgent. But their words were muffled, distant, as if I were hearing them through water. A strange calmness settled over me. I should have been terrified. I should have been fighting, clinging to life. But instead, I felt light. At the edge of my vision, something shifted. A glow. Soft at first, then growing brighter. Not harsh. Not blinding. Warm. Inviting. It called to me. I turned toward it, drawn by something I couldn't explain. The scene below, the frantic paramedics, my sobbing wife, began to blur, fading into the background. I felt weightless, free. Then, just as I surrendered to it, just as I let go, the darkness ripped me away, and I fell. Top of form, bottom of form. Not in the way a body falls, not like tumbling from a great height, with wind rushing past and gravity pulling downward. No, this was something else entirely. There was no air, no force, no sensation of movement, and yet I was plunging into something vast and endless. The warmth I had felt only moments before, that golden light pulling me forward, had vanished. In its place, there was only darkness. Thick, suffocating, endless darkness that stretched in every direction. It wasn't the simple absence of light. It was alive, pressing against me, swallowing me whole. I tried to scream, but there was no sound. I tried to move, but I had no body. Then the whispers began. Low at first, barely audible, like the rustling of dead leaves in the wind. Then they grew, dozens of voices, then hundreds, murmuring just beyond my understanding. Their words were slippery, shifting, crawling into my ears and seeping into my mind like an oil slick. Then I heard her. A woman's scream, raw and desperate, rising above the whispers. It stopped my breath, if I even had breath in this place. I knew that voice. It was my mother. No, I tried to say, but the word never left me. I turned, or maybe I didn't, but the darkness around me rippled, shifting like thick smoke, and suddenly I saw them. Shapes emerging from the void. Figures. They were twisted, grotesque, their faces frozen in eternal agony. Their mouths gaped open in silent screams, their hollow eyes filled with despair. They reached out, their arms impossibly long, clawing at the air as though begging for help. Men. Women. Children. I felt their suffering as if it were my own. A deep, bone-crushing sorrow that seeped into me, dragging me down. This couldn't be real. This wasn't real. Then the voice came. Deep, resounding. It didn't just speak, it vibrated, shaking the very fabric of this place, rattling inside my skull. Daniel. I froze. Everything will now be revealed. The voice was neither angry nor kind. It was neither male nor female. It simply was. Immense, infinite, and final. Before I could comprehend what it meant, the darkness tore open before me, pulling me forward, forcing me to see a throne. It loomed in the distance, rising above the desolation, impossibly high, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the dim, flickering light. It was both magnificent and terrifying, a monument of power, but not the kind that brings comfort. And sitting upon it, a figure, bound in chains. Thick, heavy shackles wrapped around his wrists and ankles, pulling him downward, his head hanging low. His posture was one of utter defeat, of eternal sorrow. A sense of dread wrapped around my chest. Who was this? Then, slowly, the figure lifted his head, and my world shattered. I knew that face. It was a face I had spoken of countless times in my sermons, a face of patience and forgiveness, a face that had inspired millions. It was the face of Prophet Yusuf. But here in this place, his eyes were filled with pain. With regret? No. I stood there frozen, staring into the sorrowful eyes of the man I had revered my entire life. Prophet Yusuf, his name had graced my sermons, his story had been a testament to patience, faith, and forgiveness. And yet, here he was, bound in chains, shackled to a throne in a place that reeked of despair. This was wrong. This was impossible. No, I whispered, though my voice barely existed in this place. This can't be. This isn't real. But he didn't disappear. He didn't dissolve into the shadows like a fleeting nightmare. He remained before me, his gaze locked onto mine, heavy with something deeper than sorrow, understanding. The voice, the one that had rattled my very existence, spoke again. Do you see now? I clenched my fists, or at least, I thought I did, but I couldn't feel my body anymore. There was only my mind, my soul, and the unbearable weight of what I was witnessing. Why is he here? My voice cracked with something I didn't want to name. Fear. Doubt. The kind that burrows deep and festers. Why are you showing me this? The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, the darkness around me shifted, swirling like ink in water. Shapes emerged. Scenes, as if unseen hands were peeling back the layers of time itself. I saw myself. I saw the years I had spent preaching, the countless prayers I had led, the moments of certainty I had carried in my voice as I guided others. And then the images changed. I saw moments I had long since buried, moments of doubt. Late nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I truly understood the God I had devoted my life to. Whispers in the back of my mind, quiet but persistent. What if you've misunderstood? What if there's more? I had ignored them. I had buried them beneath ritual, beneath routine, beneath the weight of responsibility. Because doubt was a weakness. And I could not be weak. The images flashed faster now, unraveling years in mere seconds. I saw the faces of those who had come to me in pain, searching for something more, searching for answers I had never truly asked for myself. I had given them words. I had given them comfort. But had I given them truth? The voice returned, softer this time, yet no less powerful. You have always sought the truth, Daniel. But have you truly found it? The question split something inside me. A deep, raw wound I hadn't known was there. Of course I knew God. I had spent my entire life in devotion to Him. I had prayed, fasted, lived by His word. But had I ever asked? Had I ever dared to seek beyond what I had been taught? Tears burned down my face, though I had no body to feel them. I turned back to the prophet, desperate, pleading, "Tell me what this means." He didn't speak. His expression didn't change. But in his silence, I understood. The weight of every unspoken question, every doubt I had ignored, every moment I had refused to confront the uncertainty in my own heart, it was crushing. I had been so sure, so certain. And now I was unraveling. "Why won't you say anything?" I choked, my voice raw. "Why are you just sitting there?" Still nothing. Only the steady gaze of a man who had once endured suffering beyond measure. Yet here, in this place, he carried my sorrow, my doubt. The voice came one final time, filling every space within me. "The truth is before you. Will you have the courage to face it?" And with that, the darkness collapsed, and I fell once more. But this time, it was different. There was no abyss, no suffocating darkness pressing in from all sides. Instead, there was light, blinding, all-encompassing, a brilliance that seeped into every part of me, stripping me bare, exposing me. It wasn't warm like the light I had first seen. It wasn't inviting. It was piercing. I gasped, or at least I thought I did. Did I still have lungs? A body? I didn't know anymore. I only knew that I was being pulled, yanked through space, through existence itself, rushing towards something I wasn't ready to face. Then, suddenly, I slammed back into myself. Pain. Cold, sharp, real pain. My chest burned as air ripped back into my lungs. My body, my actual, physical body, was aching, every muscle screaming in protest. My skin was clammy, drenched in sweat, my limbs too heavy to move. I blinked, my vision swimming in and out of focus. Blurred shapes hovered over me. Machines, for lines, the dim fluorescent lights of a hospital room. A steady beeping sound filled my ears, each tone punctuating the terrifying reality that I was alive. I was back. Someone gasped. "Daniel?" A face appeared above me, soft, kind, lined with worry. The nurse. Her voice wavered, caught between relief and disbelief. "You're back," she whispered. "We almost lost you." Her words barely registered. My mind was still trapped in that other place, the echoes of a voice, that voice, still reverberating through my skull. "The truth is before you. Will you have the courage to face it?" I tried to speak, but my throat was raw and my lips cracked. Amina. Where was she? The nurse must have seen the panic in my eyes. "Your wife is outside," she reassured me. "She's been waiting." "I'll call her in." I wanted to nod, to tell her yes, bring her to me, but I couldn't move. My body felt foreign, like something I was borrowing rather than something I owned. She left the room, and in the brief silence that followed, I turned my head, staring at the ceiling. I was back. But I was not the same. I could still feel it, that place, the weight of what I had seen. The throne, the prophet's sorrowful gaze, the voice that had stripped away every illusion I had ever clung to. And worse than anything else, the doubt. A doubt I could no longer silence. A doubt that would not let me go. Top of form. Bottom of form. Everything looked the same. The sterile white walls of the hospital, the hum of machines, the familiar touch of Amina's hand gripping mine, as if she feared I might disappear again. But I was not the man she had brought to the emergency room. Something inside me had shifted, ruptured. I had spent my entire life believing that I knew the truth, that I had walked the right path, that I had been chosen to lead others in faith. But now I was the one in need of answers. The question still echoed, relentless, unshakable. Who is God? I didn't speak of what I had seen, not at first. How could I? How could I tell my wife, my congregation, my friends that I had been pulled into something beyond human comprehension, that I had seen things that shattered everything I once believed? Would they call me crazy? Would they say I was delirious from the medication, from the trauma of nearly dying? Maybe, but I knew better. So I stayed silent, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the right person. And then, one sleepless night, I found myself in this small hospital chapel, sitting in the dim light of flickering candles, staring at the cross mounted on the wall. I hadn't meant to come here. My feet had led me without thought, as if something unseen was guiding me. I sank into a wooden pew, exhaustion weighing on my bones, my mind a storm of questions. And then he walked in. An older man, dressed simply, his collar marking him as a priest. He carried a small Bible in his hands, his movements slow, deliberate. He saw me and hesitated. Then, with a gentle nod, he approached and sat beside me. "You look troubled, my friend," he said, his voice calm, steady. I exhaled shakily, rubbing my palms together. "I don't even know where to begin." He didn't push, didn't pry. He just listened, his presence quiet but unwavering. So I told him. I told him about the light, the darkness, the voices that had shaken me to my core. I told him about the throne, the sorrowful gaze of the prophet, the question that refused to leave me. When I finished, I expected doubt, skepticism, maybe even pity. Instead, he simply nodded. "You've been given a gift," he said softly. I let out a hollow laugh. "It doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like a curse." He smiled, but there was sadness in it. "The truth often does at first." I turned to him then, searching his face. "Tell me, Father," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "who is God?" He studied me for a long moment, then opened his Bible. His fingers traced over the pages before settling on a verse. "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." The words hit me like a thunderclap. I had heard them before. I had dismissed them before. But here now, after everything, they burned through me. He closed the Bible and met my gaze. "The truth is not found in the places we expect," he said. "Sometimes, God has to break us to make us see." Tears welled in my eyes, though I wasn't sure why. For the first time since my return, I felt something other than fear. I felt seen. I wasn't alone in this. And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. The truth never lets you go once you've seen it. It clings to you, reshaping the way you think, the way you see the world, the way you breathe. No matter how much I tried to push it away, it was there, burning, demanding to be acknowledged. After that night in the chapel, I couldn't return to the life I had before. I had changed. I sat with Father James many times after that, pouring out every thought, every fear, every piece of my old beliefs that now felt unstable beneath my feet. He didn't rush me. He didn't try to force my steps. He simply listened, offering words that made the weight in my chest just a little lighter each time. One afternoon, as we sat across from each other in his small office, surrounded by shelves of old books and the scent of aged leather, I finally voiced the question that had been gnawing at me since my return. How do I let go of everything I once knew? Father James folded his hands, watching me closely. You don't have to let go of everything, Daniel. You have to surrender to the truth when you recognize it. I swallowed hard. And what if it takes me away from the people I love? He sighed, his gaze gentle but unwavering. The truth will always divide. It's the nature of revelation. But it will also set you free. The words settled deep in my bones. That night, I prayed, not out of obligation, not out of routine, but out of sheer desperation. God, if you are truly there, if what I have seen is real, then show me the path. Give me the courage to walk it. I didn't expect an answer, but he gave me one anyway. The dreams came again, but they were different this time. The throne was still there, towering in the distance, but Prophet Yusuf was no longer bound in chains. He stood tall, unshackled, his expression no longer one of sorrow, but of quiet strength. His eyes met mine, and this time he spoke. Go! Find the truth. I woke up gasping, my chest tight, my hands trembling. But for the first time since my near-death experience, I wasn't afraid. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't an easy decision. When I told Amina that I had decided to be baptized, she wept. This isn't you, she whispered, gripping my hands as if she could hold me back from what I was about to do. You are an Imam. You have dedicated your life to Islam. You can't just turn away from everything you have built. Tears burned in my eyes. I'm not turning away from the truth, I said softly. I'm walking toward it. She shook her head, stepping away from me as if I had become a stranger. And maybe, in her eyes, I had. But I couldn't deny what had been revealed to me. I couldn't pretend that the voice that had shaken my soul, the visions that had shown me my own doubt, had been nothing. I had seen. And once you see, you can never unsee. The day of my baptism was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I had spent decades leading others in prayer, believing I understood faith. But as I stood in the water, my heart racing, I realized that faith had never been about certainty. It had always been about surrender. Father James looked me in the eyes, his expression one of quiet encouragement. Are you ready, Daniel? I nodded. Yes. And as the water washed over me, as I let go of every fear, every hesitation, every chain that had bound me for so long, I felt something break free inside me. For the first time in my life, I felt alive. I never imagined that I would die and return. When my heart stopped, I thought that was the end. But what I experienced beyond this life changed everything I thought I knew. I saw the darkness, the suffering, the chains of doubt that had weighed on my soul. And then I saw Him. God was not an idea, not just words in a book. He was real. His presence was undeniable, and in that moment, I realized how blind I had been. I had spent years leading others in faith, but had I truly known Him? Had I sought Him with my whole heart, or had I only accepted what was given to me? That question shook me to my core. When I was pulled back into this world, I knew I couldn't go back to who I was before. I had seen the truth, and the truth demands action. I had to surrender, not just to faith, but to God Himself. Now I ask you, if you had seen what I saw, how would you feel? Would you continue living the same way, or would you seek Him with everything inside you? This is your moment. Do not wait until it's too late. God is calling you, just as He called me. Open your heart, seek Him, and let Him transform your life. If you feel this message in your soul, leave a prayer in the comments. I will pray for you. Tell me, what would you do if you had experienced what I did? And if this story has touched you, like, subscribe, and share this video. Let this truth reach those who need it. Let's spread the light together.